A very warm welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Isa Suarez. Tonight, Ukraine vows to get its grain to desperate international markets, even after Russia targets the port city of Odessa. But will that be possible? Then the Pope apologizes to Canada's Indigenous communities for the evil committed by Christians. Plus, record high temperatures and raging wildfires. We'll look at the clear signs of climate change happening right now, right around the world. But first, Ukraine is trying to keep a deal on track that would help alleviate hunger right around the world, saying it plans to resume grain exports through the Black Sea just within days. But Russian missile strikes on the key port city of Odessa are intensifying major concerns about the safe passage of ships. The attack happened just a day after Ukraine and Russia signed the UN brokered deal in Turkey. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls the strikes barbarism that show Moscow cannot be trusted. Russia says it hit military targets, insisting it did not violate any commitments in the grain agreement. CNN's Nick Robertson is following developments tonight for us from Kyiv and joins me now. So, Nick, what happens next? Can Ukraine still export the grain after this attack on Odessa?
Ukraine says it absolutely intends to do that, but really the question has to be, what does Russia do next? Because it had that missile strike on Saturday, which Ukraine is interpreting as Russia just showing that it has the upper hand, it has the authority, it has the ability to sort of dictate what's going on the ground. So it's entirely feasible that Russia will do something else that could upend what Ukraine says it's a commitment at the moment to try to get this get their grain exported. They said today that they've sent their representatives to Istanbul to be at the joint communications center that's going to oversee the implementation of the deal. So from Ukraine's perspective, it's all systems go. But the question mark is going to be over Russia. Despite Russia's missile strikes in Odessa Saturday, Ukraine's officials are vowing to push ahead with the UN deal to get grain from their ports to the world's needy.
I hope that during upcoming days we will start delivering grain from our seaports in Odessa.
But Russian missiles aren't the only obstacle creating uncertainty about Russia's commitment. Russia's foreign minister asserting nothing in the deal prevents them hitting military targets in Odessa, and misinformation too, claiming rights for Russian ships not in the agreement.
In the open sea, Russia, Turkey, together with another participant which is to be determined, accompany the convoys to the straits.
So we won't allow to do this. Our territorial waters and our seaports, only Ukraine and Ukrainian Navy will be there.
So no Russian ships escorting the convoys anywhere along the convoy?
Ships at all in this process.
Ukraine's plan B, to export grain by train, truck and river, is still in play. But like the UN deal, this too is beset by uncertainty. Train cars full of grain have been shelled by Russia and tracks blown up.
We are again doing our best. We are trying to export more through our Danube ports with the help of our railway, Ukrainian Railways company, and by trucks.
If the UN deal to export grain from the ports can hold, Ukrainian officials estimate the value to their beleaguered nation could be a much-needed $1 billion a month.
And Nick, worth reminding our viewers, of course, that it took months to get this agreement. Does Ukraine, from those you've been speaking to, does Ukraine and the UN's Antonio Guterres, who I believe call this a beacon of hope, believe that Russia will abide by its word, that it can be trusted here?
You know, I think it's very much an open question. The hope is that Russia will stick to its word. And, you know, Russia, according to what we hear from Russian officials, is sticking by the letter of its word. But I think there's something sort of, you know, in the background here as well that is worth considering. The Ukraine and Russia didn't sign the same deal. They signed separate and parallel but different deals with the United Nations. Russia's part of the deal was that it was allowed to export some food and fertilizer that were being controlled by international sanctions. It is Russia that started the war in Ukraine. It is Russia the reason Ukraine cannot export its grain around the world. So by Russia giving its assent for Ukraine to export its grain has come at the price of Russia having some sanctions lifted on it. This is, in essence, extortion. So when when the Ukrainians look at the table on the balance of what's happened here, they would see it that they are keeping good on their commitment and that Russia is trying to derail the process. They are intent on keeping going. But I think from where we stand at the moment, if by the end of this week or this time next week, Ukraine has managed to get at least one convoy of ships shipping out grain sort of all the way down the Bosphorus, then that's going to be a positive indicator. But there's still a lot of time between now and then.
Indeed. Nick Robertson for us in Kyiv, Ukraine. Thanks very much, Nick. Appreciate it. Well, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in Africa. He's trying to gain support for Russia's war in Ukraine, in the continent most affected, of course, by the grain blockades. Lavrov just met with the leaders of the Republic of Congo and will later travel to Uganda as well as Ethiopia. He denies that Russia is, quote, exporting hunger and blames the collective West, his words, for worsening the global food crisis. Lara Madoa tells us how African leaders are responding to the Russian foreign minister's visit.
Issa, I think it's accurate to say that Sergei Lavrov is receiving a warm reception here in Africa. This is one of the few places where Sergei Lavrov, Vladimir Putin, and Russia are not pariahs. They have a lot of support among African leaders and ordinary African people who don't want to be drawn into a proxy war between the West and Russia. But when I spoke to Samantha Power, the boss of USAID, she called out Russian allies like China for sitting out the war and remaining neutral when there is a catastrophe in the making here in terms of food security.
This is a moment for all countries that play leadership roles in the international system, as the People's Republic of China clearly aspires to do and has done in certain domains. It is for them, for all of us, to show up and to dig deeper than we have so far if we are going to prevent this crisis from becoming a catastrophe.
How big is the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine into the current problem you're seeing in Kenya and Somalia and Ethiopia?
In terms of food, just coming from Somalia, more than half of the wheat in this country, in the country of Somalia, comes from Ukraine. It is trapped in the port of Odessa. 20 million metric tons of wheat and corn are trapped. So, we can all hope and even pray that the deal that the United Nations negotiated, but that Russia immediately turned its back on by bombing the port of Odessa, that deal somehow sticks.
Do you worry about Russia's commitment to that deal if literally just hours after it was signed, they're already bombing Odessa? And what impact would that have if they don't honor the end of the deal?
Well, we have been living the contingency plan because there's no way you can trust anything that Vladimir Putin says. We are working with the Ukrainians on Plan B. Plan B involves road and rail and river and, again, sending in barges and, adjusting the rail systems so that they're better aligned with those in Europe so that the exports can move out more quickly. But there is no substitute for Putin allowing the blockade to end, his blockade to end, and the grains being sent out the most efficient way possible, especially because we've lost so much time.
Issa, Samantha Power told me the world has lost a lot of time, and that's why after her trip here in Kenya and Somalia, she's off to India, trying to find alternative sources of grain to alleviate the suffering for those who are worst affected by the global food crisis. But for Sergei Lavrov here in his trip to Uganda next and Ethiopia, he's likely to be getting a similar red carpet welcome, and African leaders keen to hear what he's got to offer. Issa?
Lara Madoa there with that perspective. Well, Ukraine says it's making progress with a counteroffensive in Kherson and could liberate the region from Russian forces by September. It says troops have attacked 3 bridges in an effort to disrupt Russian logistics in occupied areas. It says they also hit Russian command posts, as well as ammunition depots. Ukraine calls the battlefield success as a turning point in efforts to retake Kherson. We're joined now by former Defense Minister of Ukraine, Andrei Zagorodnik. He's chairman of the Center for Defense Strategies in Kyiv. Andrei, great to have you on the show. Let me start right there with that advance, really, in Kherson. Do you believe it can be recaptured by September?
It certainly can be recaptured by September. I'm not saying it will, because any military operation is obviously subject to many conditions, which are outside of control. But technically, yes. And the reason it is the case is because we already started to receive weapons from the West. So Ukraine passed that logistical curve, logistical gap by when our original weapons exhausted and the new ones still weren't coming. So Ukrainian army is getting much stronger on a sort of weekly, monthly basis. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you're talking here of the kind of the long-range HIMARS really facilitating in many ways this counteroffensive. That's what you're saying.
Including HIMARSs, but also artillery and some other weapons. Yes.
Has that changed at all the momentum of this war? I mean, is Ukraine, Andrei, taking a less defensive position because of this?
Yes, and again, I'm not saying exactly like what's going to happen, but what we do see already happening is that Russians' battle for Donbass, as it was originally called, is not actually successful for Russia. So after they captured two towns, which was happened like a month ago, right now they're struggling because they cannot they cannot attack on two operational directions. So they need to move their troops back and forth, and we clearly see they're exhausting their capabilities, which is remarkable, to be honest.
And I just want to ask my producer, Laura, to bring up that map again to show our viewers really the size of Kherson, of what we're talking about here, Andrei. It is a large chunk, of course, and it's very on the right there. You've got Mariupol, but it touches into Crimea. The importance, just strategic importance, of course, of Kherson, as well as the challenges for Ukrainian forces here, Andrei.
Yeah, it's of course it's a huge importance because it stands in the Dnieper River, and it guards the entrance to the Dnieper Channel, to the Crimean Channel, to the access to Crimea, and more importantly also the western sides of the coastline, whereas Mykolaiv and Odessa. And we do know that Russians wanted to take the whole coast. And that was the original plan. So the fact is that they're failing, and the fact that they're already struggling to keep Kherson, this is a substantial development, absolutely.
Where is Russia going wrong? Where are their tactics failing them here?
They originally overestimated their own capabilities, underestimated Ukrainian capabilities, and they underestimated the readiness of the West, as collective West, particularly the United States, UK, and some other key allies to support Ukraine. And that's exactly what's happening. So Ukrainian army gets stronger, they're not getting stronger. The Russians are exhausting on a sort of weekly basis.
And of course, while we're talking about Kherson and the potential recapturing of Kherson, possibly, as you said, by September, in Odessa, to the west, just very close to it, its port, as we've seen, has come under attack. I mean, what are the chances, you think, of Russia being trusted to hold up on its grain deal here, Andrei?
To be honest with you, there hasn't been so far any deal which they kept. So historically, it's a very low chances. But I mean, and hope is not a very good word for that, you know. But we'll do our part, of course. And again, without any promises about Kherson, we cannot count on that. Something is going to happen by September. I'm saying it's technically possible, but again, this is operational environment. It's very unpredictable and it's very dynamic. So, but sure, we will guard Odessa with all possible capabilities, and we trust that Ukraine at least will do everything needed for that deal to be kept.
And on Kherson, I mean, you're saying it's technically possible because you get the weaponry from the West still coming in. But, you know, we're, 6 months into this war? How worried are you that fatigue, Andrei, will start to set in, particularly in the West?
It happens among some politicians, but we do see some very strategically minded politicians in the West, which are actually clearly calling their colleagues to understand the strategic picture and not to get too fatigued. You know, Ukraine cannot be. We are very much tired of the war ourselves, by the way, and probably more than any other person. Yeah, so it's let's finish this as soon as possible, and let's restore the peace and territorial integrity, and you know, we're all for that. So it's just understanding what's happening that's the main thing for the fatigue. You know, we just need Western politicians to understand that this is not something you can easily finish. And yes, we do need to invest into the capabilities. Yes, we do need to continue until Russians leave us alone.
But you would say that you know, the Kherson recapturing possibly by September, this could be a turning point, Andrei? You think you could see a turning point here on this war?
Any substantial change in dynamic, and either that Kherson or the east is a very significant step. Of course, it's like a new phase where Russians clearly see that they cannot progress any further, they cannot succeed, and that change of dynamic is massively important. Absolutely.
Andrei Zagregnok, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Andrei.
Thank you.
And still to come tonight, large parts of Europe are under the highest possible fire risk as this summer's sweltering heat wave makes its way east. And firefighters in California are already battling wildfires, including one in Yosemite, moving fast. That is ahead.
Connecting Africa in association with Afrexim Bank.
The part of the problem really, Eleni, is the fact that Africa, we import most of what we consume, especially food. Africa imported over 55 million tons of wheat. The price, for example, got up from, say, average of $250 per ton to almost $600 per ton. A lot of the people cannot really afford that, and that is a big issue. That is why I keep saying that, you know, we have to look inwards. We have to really do as much as we can to add value to what we have. We have to increase, you know, production for food security.
Connecting Africa in association with Afrexim Bank.
It is hard to imagine life returning here even when the shelling stops, which it does not. You can see it's an impossible job of policing this fenceless border.
What would be the consequence? An all-out war.
Tension mounting here. This crisis created by the mad policies of a government. There is growing fear about what lies ahead. The climate crisis, it's right here, right now. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, an unprecedented heat wave continues to scorch Western Europe, with some regions under very extreme fire danger warning. Parts of Spain, Portugal, Italy and Greece are the highest risk, as you can see there. It comes as Greece continues to battle wildfires across the country. 2 more villagers on the island of Lesbos were forced to evacuate Sunday after wildfire broke out. burning houses, you can see there in that video. There are also forest fire danger warnings in places across Slovenia. I want to go down to Rome, and CNN's Barbie Nadeau joins us now. And Barbie, look, I'm not going to lie, I just came back from Tuscany on Saturday and it was very hot. I really struggled, the kids struggled, spending many hours indoors, and it just speaks to the dangers, really, of these rising temperatures. What are you hearing from officials?
That's absolutely right. The people are, the officials are worried that it's just this relentless heat. People are overheating. You felt it yourself. But, there's a slight breeze right now. It's not a cool breeze by any means, but you can feel the heat from these old stone buildings all around. It's just this relentless this relentless heat. And that is particularly difficult for people like firefighters who are fighting these raging blazes that just seem to spark out of nowhere. You've got firefighters working in 100-degree plus or 40-degree plus conditions for hours and days at a time, and these fires just pop up. You get one out, another one comes. We've got this hot wind during the day that blows these fires. It makes it so dangerous, not just for the people, but for these, destroying full forests, destroying full cropland. All of the economic toll of this, once it's counted up, is going to also be a terrible contributor to this heat wave, this unprecedented heat wave. This year that was supposed to be a good one, this summer that was supposed to be great, is so far turning into something very difficult for a lot of people to deal with.
And Barbie, how is the EU? I mean, are they stepping up in terms of helping with these firefighters? I mean, we're seeing pictures, I think is from Italy, that shows just the work, the relentless work by these firefighters right across Europe. What is the European Union saying here?
Well, in places that they can, they're sending in reinforcements. So if you don't have a fire problem in one country, the people are helping out by sending in reinforcements and trucks and things like that. But, one of the things we were talking about before the heat wave was, of course, the price of fuel, the high price of energy right now. And all of that is going to have a toll. People are afraid to run their air conditioners because it's going to be too expensive when those bills come. The firefighters don't have that choice. They have to fight the fires. They have to fill up the trucks. They have to fuel the aircraft. We're also dealing with a drought in parts of northern Italy. The rivers are low, the lakes are low, the Tiber River in Rome is at an all-time low. All of these things play a really big role in the future as much as in the moment. Everybody's worried about the moment. How are we going to get through this? When are the temperatures going to come down? But even after the temperatures come down, the problem is not going to be over at all.
Yeah, it's very worrying indeed. Barbie Nadeau for us there in Rome. Thanks very much, Barbie. Good to see you. Well, it's not just Europe that's seeing record-breaking temperatures, in fact. Multiple cities across the northeastern United States broke daily high temperatures records on Sunday. That includes Boston, Philadelphia, and Providence, Rhode Island. More than 60 million Americans are under heat alerts today across that region, as well as in the Central Plains and the Pacific Northwest. Look at those temperatures, just astounding. Well, this extreme heat and drought are fueling the fast-moving oak fire in California. It's consumed nearly 7,000 hectares just outside the Yosemite National Park, and it's only 10% contained. You can see there the CAL FIRE battalion chief says the wildfire's behavior is unprecedented and that its velocity and intensity is limiting evacuation efforts. We'll take you live to California, of course, in just a few minutes. But it's just devastating seeing those images from Yosemite. Now, China is suffering its second heat wave this month. Right now, almost 70 cities are under severe heat warnings and are expecting temperatures higher than 40 degrees Celsius. And almost 400 more cities are facing 35-degree weather. Meteorologists say it doesn't appear that relief will come anytime soon. Well, there are no reports of damage or casualties in southwestern Japan after a volcano erupted late Sunday local time. The eruption sent huge plumes of black smoke and ash in the sky, and officials say it also shot large cinder blocks into the air. Officials ordered evacuations in some areas, but they also say they don't expect any larger eruption. And still to come tonight, a pilgrimage of penance. Pope Francis visits Canada to make peace with the past and apologizes for the Catholic Church's role in decades of abuse. We'll have a live report ahead. Plus, outrage after the execution of 4 pro-democracy activists in Myanmar and fear of what might come next. I'll speak with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Myanmar next.
Back in the days, they used to do sedu weaving, to do tents, palm leaf weaving, to cover roofs, and telly to decorate clothing. But nowadays, it's starting to fade. This is one of the special nice baskets. It's a very unique palm weaving. This technique is really very difficult. We create shoes, candles, coasters, packaging. The sky is the limit. It's our duty or our responsibility to keep it and pass it to next generations.
I'm Julia Chatterley at the New York Stock Exchange, and this is CNN.
Welcome back, everyone. I am sorry, I ask forgiveness. Those words from Pope Francis, who's in Canada, what he calls a trip of penance. The Pope is apologising for the Catholic Church's role for decades of abuse of more than 150,000 of Indigenous children who were forced to attend residential schools. One government report calls it cultural genocide. The Pope expressed his pain as well as remorse before Indigenous groups near Edmonton. Have a listen.
I have come to your native lands to tell you in person of my sorrow, to implore God's forgiveness, healing, and reconciliation, to express my closeness, and to pray with you and for you.
Well, CNN's Paula Newton joins me now. And Paula, this was, of course, a long-awaited apology, and there were several apologies there from the Pope. How was it received by the Indigenous community?
I mean, so many in that crowd, so emotional, and you can imagine all the Indigenous communities watching all over this country. Many had said it was bittersweet. It was also, though, deeply personal and deeply emotional. You could see in the crowd that at times during the apologies, they would break out into applause. Other times they were really bowed in sorrow, thinking about all the years they had sent in some of these institutions, Isa. You know, the most monstrous crimes committed against them, all in fact in the name of the church. And to think now that there are still missing children, that at this very hour there are, you know, high-tech operations underway to find those children who really, whatever happened to them, their families still don't know decades later. That is why the Pope was there, Isa, and it really was a singular moment, a profound moment, because it was something that the Pope would normally not do. He was warmly received. It kind of broke apart from the normal ceremony that you see a Pope towards the end when the apology was over. So many Indigenous leaders going to the stage, offering their prayers, offering gifts. At one point, they gave him that ceremonial headdress to wear. That is really quite an honor for the Pope, and it shows certainly the warmth that they feel towards him. I have to say, though, already reaction from Indigenous groups saying this is a first step, right? They want reparations, and they want the Catholic Church to be fully transparent of what happened during in those decades. And again, the survivors themselves, Isa, having gone through so much, this is triggering for them. It does re-traumatize them, and we will learn in the next hours and days whether or not this apology in its scope brought them any comfort.
Yeah, and look, an apology, I think Pope Francis mentioned this, doesn't take away the trauma. I think this is something you touched on. From those you've spoken to, I mean, you talked about, you know, this is a first step. Clearly, sorry seems for many, Paul, isn't enough. What are we hearing in terms of the transparency, the accountability from the Pope? Did he touch on this?
He did not. Certainly the Vatican has, in saying that they are working with Indigenous communities in this country in order to have full disclosure. But it's decades in coming, Isa. And that is the problem. You know, it struck me that the Pope is 85 years old. And you know, you have covered him, Isa. He is infirm. He is not in good health. He has canceled other trips. He decided it was important to come here on Canadian soil. But it's taken quite a while. And it struck me that he was receiving survivors that are around the same age as him in many cases, also having a hard time getting to this location through what was not the best weather. And yet there they were all together in warmth. I think what so many people are asking is what's taken so long. And there is the Pope and his spiritual forgiveness, certainly, that he is asking for, but there is also the transparency and really the accountability from the political side of the Catholic Church here in Canada and of the Vatican that is still not forthcoming, and that many survivors will wait to see if it happens, if in this first step they see the next steps of what should be happening here, if this apology is to be, you know, taken in its full sincerity.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I have to say, Paula, you probably can add more to this. It was a very powerful image, seeing in the Indigenous culture and the people in front of the Pope who said that the Church cooperated, I think he said, in cultural destruction of Indigenous people. That image was incredibly powerful.
Absolutely, and they were catastrophic, he said, catastrophic consequences, and think about that. He said, you know, towards the end, very spontaneously, a woman sang the national, an Indigenous woman sang the national anthem in her native language through tears streaming down her face. It was a moment that took everyone by surprise. It was very spontaneous, and yet it meant so much. It was as if she was pouring all of her grief out to the Pope right there in front of her. Again, a rare moment, a profound moment, one that I could see that the Pope was really taking in, and now we need to know what comes next. And Isa, just before I let you go, we need to think as well about that intergenerational trauma. These might be elders, but it has affected their children and their grandchildren to this day. These are people who did not have family lives the way you and I know them to be, and they suffer to this day, and they say they will go to their graves suffering in that way for what the Catholic Church did to them.
Such a very good point, Paula Newton, for us there. Thanks very much, Paula. Appreciate it. I want to return now to our top story, the Russian attack on Ukraine's port of Odessa that threatened to jeopardize a deal meant to ease, of course, a global food crisis. Ukraine says it plans to resume grain exports within days, despite the weakened attack. And the United Nations now confirms that Russia has recommitted to the export agreement as well. I want to go live to Odessa. We're joined by CNN's Ivan Watson. So, Ivan, given what we've just heard from the UN and from Russia, Ukrainian officials confident that Russia will stick to its word?
I think the Ukrainians will be very quick to say that they don't trust the Russians, and that the Russian cruise missile attack on the Odessa port on Saturday morning hours after this export grain agreement was signed is proof, they argue, that you cannot trust Moscow. And yet, Ukrainian officials are saying they do want to stick to the agreement. They do want to resume the exports that have been suspended since Russia invaded Ukraine and launched this blockade of its ports in February of last year. The Ukrainians do not want to be seen as the ones who are holding back food, the result of which has plunged tens of millions of people into acute hunger. They want to be seen as part of the solution, which is also what Moscow is trying to do, is try to argue that, hey, the Russians are on board and are going to try to work towards a solution. In the Ukrainians' case, they say the responsibility is up to the guarantors of this agreement, notably Turkey and the United Nations. The Turks are saying they want the grain to be shipped. They want the first ship to go out soon. Let's see if they can pull this all together. The paperwork is still being drawn up for the establishment of this joint coordination center, which will be operating out of Istanbul, which will be charged with inspecting the cargo ships that should be loaded with grain and ensuring that they can safely travel through the Black Sea to the Bosphorus Strait and subsequently take their grain to global markets. Isa.
And Ivan, very quickly, do you know how soon these exports should start? I know we're saying soon, but do we have a sense of a timeline here?
We don't have an exact day. In fact, I just saw a statement saying that they want this joint coordination committee to start on the 27th of this month. They have to demine the ports. That's an issue. And they have to figure out one other factor that the Russian foreign minister proposed, which is that every ship, once it got past Ukrainian waters, would be escorted, he said, by Russian, Turkish, and some ship from a country that has yet to be determined, which suggests there's still some work to be done on the diplomatic front to find out who else will be helping with this very delicate process.
Yeah, not just a logistical nightmare, but also a diplomatic one, too. Ivan, once appreciated. Thanks very much. Live from Odessa for us there. We're now seeing protests in Myanmar after the military junta executed 4 activists. 2 of them were well-known pro-democracy activists accused of terrorism. It is the first known use of capital punishment there in decades. And human rights groups fear there will be more. The military government has been cracking down on pro-democracy figures ever since it seized power, if you remember, last year. I want to bring in Tom Andrews, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar, who joins me now. Tom, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Look, this is a truly shocking news. Your reaction to these brutal executions, Tom?
Just horrific. It is for people who have given their lives fighting for freedom for the people of Myanmar. It is tragic. But listen, there have been thousands of people who have been killed. Villages continue to be bombed. 14,000 people, more than 14,000 people have been incarcerated. 140 people are on death row. And 1,400 children have been arbitrarily detained, 61 of them being held as hostage to get their parents to give themselves up. So this is a very tragic, horrific situation that continues, unfortunately, Isa, to get worse.
And those numbers, Tom, are just absolutely staggering. I mean, do you worry at this stage, Tom, this is a sign of things to come, or a sign of just how desperate the junta is to keep its power?
Well, both, Isa. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a desperate act. They are deeply unpopular among the people of Myanmar. There's no question about it. And I think what they're trying to do is instill even greater fear among those who would be considering becoming part of the active opposition movement. And there's a very active opposition movement throughout Myanmar. I'm afraid that this is going to have just the opposite effect on the people of Myanmar. This is going to increase their anger and their frustration and their determination to free themselves of this nightmare. So I think we have many more dark days ahead, I'm afraid.
You don't think this will silence them, Tom?
Not at all. Just the opposite. I know them. I can tell you, just the opposite.
How much, Tom, though, is this a rebuke to Western leaders and the UN and the ASEAN countries who have been trying, I think it's fair to say, to persuade the junta to halt its violence?
Well, they've been using persuasion, words, that's true. And as a matter of fact, even within ASEAN itself, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the chair of that, of ASEAN, the Prime Minister of Cambodia, made a personal appeal to Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the junta, to not execute these political prisoners. And so we all see what has happened. I think that this is a message to the world that they simply don't care about what the world has to say. They're going to continue to move forward. And I think it's going to take action, real pressure, rather than just words before this stops.
Reading here a statement really from yourself condemning what's happened is on Twitter, and you said these depraved acts must be a turning point for the international community. So they don't care. Why don't they care? Do you feel, Tom, that Myanmar has been ignored by the Western world, and the Western world is in action, so as you call it?
Yes, there's no question. And, when you talk to people in Myanmar, they'll say, look, we have great sympathy for the people of Ukraine. And certainly the junta, the military junta, greatly supports those who invaded Ukraine. But they say to me, look, it took less than 4 days for the international community to act, to have a special session of the UN Security Council. And even though that resolution was vetoed ultimately, we all knew that was going to happen. It at least got the full light of day, the full attention of the world. And it eventually went to the General Assembly for an emergency special session. They're saying to me, it took 4 days for that to happen in Ukraine. It's been over a year and a half since we've been facing this nightmare. What is it about this situation that is so different? Why can't the international community support us in our month, our year and a half of great need? And they have a very good point.
So what can be done then in that case, in the short term here?
Well, in the immediate term, I think the Security Council should take this up. They should have a vote. They should allow countries to have their say and then to vote up or down.
But won't China just veto it, Tom?
Okay, of course, just as we saw the veto happen in Ukraine. But then we have there are many additional options, including having those countries willing to take action to finally get together and work together to coordinate sanctions, tough economic sanctions, and arms embargo, and then to do the simplest things like providing humanitarian aid for the desperate people of Myanmar. Half the country has fallen into poverty. There is an emergency response, humanitarian response fund by the United Nations, and only 10% of that fund for 2022 has been filled by the international community. So there are many options for action. What we don't have right now is the political will for the international community and leaders of the international community to take those actions.
Tom Andrews, really appreciate you taking time to speak to us, the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar. Appreciate it, Tom.
Thank you, Isa.
Still to come tonight, it's a much less severe cousin of the smallpox virus, but is now spreading right across the world. The latest warnings about the monkeypox outbreak when we return.
We share this place, we all belong.
Stretch is a mobile case-picking robot. It can move around the warehouse. It has vision integrated with it, but it also has a manipulator. And so in terms of the jobs it's doing, it's the first manipulation robot that's mobile for the warehouse. We see the future being adding mobility to more and more dexterous manipulation. So right now we can manipulate a box, and that's still a fairly basic manipulation task. But if we build better end effectors or better hands, we might be able to start picking up more complicated parts, maybe playing a role, moving parts around a manufacturing facility instead of just a warehouse, or operating and doing repair work in a dangerous environment where a person can't go. Maybe you really need dexterous manipulation to figure out why a piece of equipment is failing, and it's clear across the country. And you don't have to go because a robot can be there.
Going Green, in association with Kirloskar, Limitless.
Well, today in our Going Green series featuring young environmentalists, we head to the equator to meet an indigenous climate advocate in the Amazon rainforest. Lara Madura has more for you.
There is this intimate relationship with nature, and that is the most beautiful part of living in the Amazon rainforest. More than a passion, it's a part of my upbringing.
Often called the lungs of planet Earth, the Amazon is home for countless animals, biodiversity, and more than 400 indigenous tribes.
For context, my community is out in the rainforest, is geographically isolated, and we have a very organized and articulated community. We have trust in our leaders that they will take us in the right path, because we all share the same value in the community, which is protecting our community and protecting the Amazon rainforest. And that's also why we can see the results now of how Sarayaku has contributed.
Ecuador makes up only 2% of the Amazon rainforest, but it has one of the highest deforestation rates relative to its size, according to data from Global Forest Watch. In 2012, the Inter-American Human Rights Court upheld the Sarayaku tribe's rights to physical integrity, but this and other communities' way of life here are still at risk because of the overexploitation of natural resources.
So Sarayaku's case in the Inter-American Court is actually, it was a landmark victory for indigenous people's rights. It's not something that we chose to do, it's something we just found ourselves in these circumstances of having to protect our home.
Now, at the age of 20, Helena Gualinga advocates for climate action around the world, giving a first-hand account of life in the Amazon.
One essential part of this is storytelling, and we need to start sharing these stories, our lived experiences, what goes on in territory, what people are living, what we're feeling, what we're facing. But people should also care, because it does not just affect people in the Amazon. It affects everyone. It's about the survival of the entire population of this planet. I am someone that has the ability to share the messages and share the stories, and I think that is how I contribute to my community, by being this bridge builder, being this bridge between the two worlds that I've lived in.
Inspirational young woman right there. Well, for this and more stories about the next generation of climate environmentalists, you can visit cnn.com/goinggreen. And I'll be right back.
One of the key things that we want to do is to make sure we're closer to our clients, and to that end we plan to open offices in the US and open offices in Europe as well, just to be close to investors. If we attract more investors, we'll attract more capital, we'll attract more companies that want to list in our venue. So biotech, for example. We started a new chapter around biotech companies to allow companies with no revenues to raise capital, to discover all these great drugs that we're seeing and all that. In this period, 95 companies decided to list in Hong Kong, raising over 200 billion Hong Kong dollars, which allowed Hong Kong to become the second largest fundraising hub in the world. And if you think about a place where you can capture all the flows from east and from west, isn't that the best in the world?
There is nowhere in Lysychansk that's safe.
Let me show you what this scene looks like. It's absolutely obliterated. The force of that blast blowing out windows.
President Putin has been sending this message. He can hit this country anywhere, anytime.
Farmers are still working, even with the threat of Russian artillery that could land here.
Ukraine's message, please send more weapons.
Now, a spike in cases of monkeypox around the world is escalating concerns. Days after the World Health Organization called the outbreak a global health emergency, more than 16,000 cases of the virus now have been reported in more than 70 countries, as you can see there, including about 2,900 in the US. The White House is deciding whether to declare a public health emergency. Our senior medical correspondent, Elizabeth Cohen, joins us now. And Elizabeth, this, of course, will be a concern for so many. How worried should we be here?
You know, one thing I want to say about monkeypox, Issa, is that it is not COVID. COVID spreads so easily, especially the more recent variants. Monkeypox does not spread as easily. It spreads from prolonged skin-to-skin contact. It's very personal contact, so it's a very different thing. Of course we should be concerned. There are many cases around the world, but most people really are not vulnerable to it right at this point in time. Let's take a look at the monkeypox numbers. So if we look around the world, what we're seeing is nearly 17,000 reported cases. In the U.S., nearly 3,000. In the U.S., the CDC says that 99% of the cases have been reported among people who report male-to-male sexual contact. So two thoughts on these numbers. One, the first two numbers are probably significantly larger than what we're seeing here. It just hasn't made it into the official list. For that 99%, sexual contact can spread it, but it doesn't actually require intercourse. It can be close skin-to-skin, prolonged skin-to-skin contact, not hugging someone, not brushing up against someone, let's say in a movie theater or something like that, if you're sitting next to someone, but more prolonged skin-to-skin contact. And so that's really important to remember. Let's take a look at vaccination efforts in the U.S., because I think it's telling actually for the rest of the world as well. So in the U.S., there 300,000 doses of the monkeypox vaccine have been distributed, but there are 1.5 million people who are eligible, and each person needs 2 doses. So you can see there's not nearly enough vaccine, even in the U.S., which usually is a leader sort of in vaccine supply. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get enough vaccine out there. Issa?
What about, Elizabeth, in the case globally? I mean, what measures are being taken? Are there enough vaccines globally?
Certainly not. I mean, if you look at a country that is as wealthy as the U.S. and the U.S. doesn't have enough, other countries also do not have enough. So there needs to be a big effort, just as with COVID, to get vaccines to places that need them. You've got 75 countries that are reporting monkeypox. So there are vaccine issues around the world right now.
Elizabeth Cohen there for us. Appreciate it, Elizabeth,
Thanks.
joining us there from Atlanta. Now, a quick move at the Moscow Chess Open nearly cost one player his finger. You heard that right. The 7-year-old boy was up against a chess-playing robot. Tournament officials say after making a move, the boy didn't give the robot a chance really to respond, causing the robot to malfunction, grabbing his finger and then breaking it. As you can see there, bystanders rushed to help the boy get free. The good news is he finished the tournament with a cast in his finger. I was asking my producer earlier who won. They don't know whether, of course, I'm glad that he's well, but it'll be interesting. I'm guessing that the boy won this time. He'll probably be happy about that. And staying in the world of tech, you are watching the moment China successfully docked a new laboratory module to a space station under construction. The docking marks the penultimate phase as China aims to complete its orbital outpost by the end of the year. 3 astronauts were on board to witness the docking in orbit. The last component for the Chinese station is set to launch in October. And this one's particularly for my director who loves the Eurovision. Europe's biggest music event, Eurovision, is coming to the UK. Get your glitter out. But it's not under the circumstances anyone would have hoped for, of course. You remember this year's winning performance came from Ukraine's Kalish Orchestra. Have a look.